Welcome back to the stage, the president of the American Academy of Nursing, Bobby Berkowitz.
Welcome back. Before we get started, I'd like to invite Debbie Gross up to the microphone for a thank you.
Thank you, Bobby. I just wanted to take this opportunity to first acknowledge the Jonas Policy Scholars who are working with us. I'm not going to name them, but if you're here, please stand. You make a difference in our lives. And we hope to make a difference in your life. And I do also want to formally thank the Jonas Center for the enormous support of this program. It has really been a huge help to all of us, so we thank the Jonases. Thank you.
Thank you, Debbie. So as the official journal of the American Academy of Nursing and the Council for the Advancement of Nursing Science, each year, Nursing Outlook honors one of its authors with the Award for Excellence in Writing in Nursing Outlook. So it's my pleasure to welcome Marion Broom, the editor-in-chief, to the podium to present this year's award.
Thank you. Thank you. Actually, there's 4 awards because we have 4 categories. And before I say who these individuals are, I want to thank all of you who are currently reviewers. None of this would be possible without your I continue to be amazed at how incredibly busy people take time to do outstanding reviews for the journal, and we just wouldn't, the journal would not be what it is by any measure without your help. If you're not a reviewer, we have a new website. If you've been frustrated with the website, I'm sorry. So have I. We've got it fixed now. So if you would please be willing to be a reviewer, that would be wonderful, because the larger the database, the less we have to call on each of you. So thank you very much. So we have 4 awards. The first one, I want to also thank there's a group of reviewers led by Barbara Smith from the editorial board, who look at all of the different measures, how many times an article is downloaded, the actual quality, the rigor of the paper, et cetera, and these are selected by that committee and recommended to me. And I have with me Dr. Michael Weaver, who's a member of the editorial board. Any other members of the editorial board, please stand. They really do work incredibly hard to move this journal the way it's needed to. Debbie didn't stand up, but she's on there. It's okay. Our first award is Excellence in Policy, and that was from the special issue on migration and immigration health. So Forced Migration, Health and Human Rights Issues Among Refugee Populations by Judy Laurie and Joycine Boyle. I know we had heard that. Is Jody coming? Yes. Okay, great. Oh, you both do. That's great. And our second is in the category of education, the Doctor of Nursing Practice by 2015, an examination of nursing schools' decisions to offer a Doctor of Nursing Practice degree. First author Grant Martzloff, also David Auerbach, Joanne Spetz, Marjorie Pearson, and Ashley Muschau. And I know the grant's here to accept. Our third paper is the impact of is in the area of practice, the impact of nurse practitioners on health outcomes of Medicare and Medicaid patients. Gina Oliver, Sarah Ravel, Leila Pennington, and Marilyn Rance. And on behalf of this incredibly productive team, they've published a fair amount in Nursing Outlook, Judith Miller, the Dean at University of Missouri Columbia, will be accepting their award on their behalf. And our final award, and the recipients are not here, is in the area of research, and it's the paper and practice characteristics of primary care nurse practitioners and physicians. Peter Burehaus is the first author, Catherine M. DeRoche, Robert Ditkus, and Karen Donnellan. So on behalf of them, give a round of applause. And we will make sure that they get their awards in the mail. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Marion. Now, to introduce our closing keynote presentation, please welcome to the stage Planning Committee and Board Member Linda Scott.
Good morning. On behalf of the Planning Committee, it is my pleasure to welcome you to our closing keynote, Addressing Health Inequities Within an Environment of Title Reform. Our speaker is Dr. Stuart Altman. Are you guys? And our moderator is outgoing Academy Board member, Dr. David Keepnews. As you will see from their bios printed in your program, they are well prepared to engage us in a dialogue on this important topic. Again, please join me in welcoming them to the stage, and Dr. Keepnews.
Thank you, Linda. I'm David Keepnews, and until about an hour ago, I was your board secretary. So I guess as the Planning Committee, knowing that I might be depressed over that, gave me the privilege of introducing Stuart Altman. We've heard during this conference discussion of the business case for care transformation, nursing and healthcare economics, innovative models in quality and payment, and implications of childhood poverty. So all of them really speaking to changes going on in healthcare delivery and financing within a context of social determinants of health. Now, I know that you all have the strategic goals of the Academy memorized, but just in case, as a refresher, we're talking the current strategic goals. Among them are leading efforts in partnership with others to address the broad range of factors that affect the health of populations, and positioning nurses to lead change and healthcare and drive policy. As you all know, the IOM recommendations among them were to prepare and enable nurses to lead change to advance health. So in the policy environment that we're in now, with an emphasis on containing costs, with a periodic focus on debt, on the cost of vital entitlement programs, there doesn't seem to be a big appetite for big new social projects and programs that can address these inequities and social determinants of health. Even the Affordable Care Act had to be framed as budget neutral, with some of those programs still unfunded. So as we go forward to shape policy to tackle social determinants of health, to improve population health, what's realistic, what's doable in this policy environment, what's likely to change or not change with the coming elections, depending on who accepts the results of those elections. So we're very pleased that Stuart Altman is here to talk to us today. Stuart is a premier health economist, but so much more. His impact on health policy spans more than 40 years. He's been a member of and has chaired several commissions, has served in the administration. I won't say which president's administration, I'll leave that up to him. Many of you are familiar with him through his role in chairing the Committee to Assess Progress in implementing the recommendations of the IOM report on the future of nursing. And a few of us here were also lucky enough to be among a cadre of nurses who've been able to study with Stuart as we earned our doctorates at the Heller School at Brandeis University. So we know Stuart as a teacher, a mentor, and general source of wisdom and support. We also learned early that Stuart is a health policy leader who truly supports and understands nursing and its power, our power, to transform healthcare. So it's truly a pleasure to be here to hear from and then to talk with Dr. Stuart Altman.
Thank you, David. So I'm a little nervous this morning, not because I get the opportunity to talk before you, but normally I sort of hang on slides, you know, they are kind of but I decided to go sort of neutral here and just talk to you. So I can't tell you how pleased I am to be here. It was in 1969, a few years ago, that I was given the task of helping to frame nursing in the federal efforts in terms of expanding the nurse training acts that began in 1966, and I wrote a book on the future supply of nurses, and you've more than exceeded every projection I came up with, so I'm so pleased. Yes, good job. So here's the story as I see it. I chair a commission in Massachusetts called the Health Policy Commission, and we're responsible for doing a really complicated task, which is to see that overall spending in the Commonwealth of Massachusetts stays within the growth in our income in the state, which is around 3.6%, but to do it while we improve the quality and access to health care. And to do it without regulating prices, but to sort of try to focus on efforts that really make a difference. And we had 2 days of hearings this Monday and Tuesday, and the issue about social determinants was very prominent. So let me just lay out just a few things, and then we'll open it up for discussion, because I want to spend most of the time on that. So this is not a good news, bad news, but the reality of the world we face. And the reality is that healthcare in general cannot expect to continue to see the growth in revenues that it has had over the last 20, 30 years. Governments at the Medicare and Medicaid level are going to constrain their budgets. For the most part, healthcare has been the beneficiary of increasing payments from private insurance, and that is beginning to run its course. So what healthcare needs to do, and here I cannot think of a more important group than senior nurses, both at the bedside, but more and more in roles of authority within our healthcare system at the hospital or health system level. We have to find a way to provide higher quality care in a constrained budget. And you, in your roles, as I look around the health system, you need to be leaders in this area. And when we did the IOM study, the one area that I pushed pretty hard was leadership. And leadership across the board, not so much on boards and stuff, actually running our health system. And I'm so pleased when I run into chief operating officers who had been nurses or had been nurses. Of course, we've always had chief nursing officers, but more and more your role in the leadership, because we need to figure out a way, and we are doing it. It's not that we need to figure it out. We need to do more of it, which is provide higher quality care without necessarily using more resources. So that's a given. This isn't going to change. and no amount, and so we have to do that. But the second one, which David pointed out, and I know you've spent a lot of time, is the recognition, finally, that good health is more than good health services. It requires a balance of investments and use of what we now talk about as the social determinants. And having the Robert Wood Johnson Foundation change its focus towards the culture of health cannot be more important. In the beginning, I'm an economist, and we tend to look at money and stuff like that. And so in the beginning, I didn't get it. But I get it now. And I see the information, I see the research, I get it. And that is, good health needs a combination of good health care, no question about it, but proper investments in whether it's education, case management, use of in behavioral health, beyond the strict confines of the health system, whether it's the hospital or the clinic. And who can do a better job than nurses in doing that? You have to be in a leadership role here. And every time I see a nurse taking on that role, I say, go for it. Go for it. We need more and more of that. For many years, I've been a bit of a critic of our health system when I looked at how we didn't do well compared to international comparisons. So when I go before our doctors and our hospitals and our nurses, I'm saying, look, I'm sorry. In one way, it was wrong for us, people like me, to criticize you who do such a great job, because it's not our health system itself that's been failing. It's been our social system that has not been integrated. And as we move... Thank you, because... And when you look at the numbers, I just recently saw those numbers. There's this a wonderful study done by Lauren Taylor at Harvard, and she looked at these numbers internationally. So we spend 18% of our GDP on healthcare services, but only 9 to 10 on social. You go to France, they'll spend 10 to 12% on health, but 15 to 20% on social services. And the same thing is true in Sweden and then Germany and stuff like that. So we need to figure out a way to integrate the social. Now, again, I'm still an economist. We just can't willy-nilly throw resources. It has to be done in a very productive, constructive way. And that's why these new forms, these ACO models, these accountable care organizations, which give credit to the health system for keeping people healthy, so that so that we can begin to see somewhat of a restructuring of the dollars, but to do it in a way that really improves the overall health, not only of your direct patients, but the populations you serve. So these are the two forces that are going to go forward over the next 5, 10, 15 years, and nursing has to be at the center of that. So thank you so much. We'll have a question and answer. You probably know a lot more about it than I do, but I'm glad to be part of it. Thank you for everything. You've been wonderful.
So, I think, okay, I'm mic'd.
Okay.
Okay, so here we are. So, Stuart, one question that occurs as you closed. You talked about some new models like the ACOs, which are models of healthcare payment, and certainly create incentives, or intended to create incentives, to keep people healthier. Is that going to be enough? That's still within the context of providing health care. Is that focus on reforming how healthcare is paid for going to bring us part of the way toward what you talked about in terms of a need for an added emphasis on social services? Or does that need to be a parallel effort?
So there is, look, I mean, we have many aspects of the social aspects that are being funded by public health departments, by education departments, all across our system. They are under stress themselves. And sure, I'd like to see more money being spent in those areas. And I do hope we will spend more money on it. But let's focus on the things that we can do. we in the healthcare system, you know, we're sitting on $3 trillion of money in the healthcare system. And let's be clear about it. You know better than I that there are billions of dollars that can be partially reallocated in a way that improves the health of our population. So sure, I mean, we need to be pushing in our civic area to get more money in the non-health world into the social world. But, you know, I'm a believer in doing what we can do. We, you, me, to the extent I can, be a player here, is to take the marginal dollars in healthcare, provide the right set of incentives for the healthcare system to say, you know, if we do a good job on health, we're going to get some of that money back for healthcare. So it's not a, I'm just going to give it away. The idea is to create a set of incentives where it's a win-win game. I don't believe it should be a win-lose game. It has to be a win-win game. And that's why whether it's ACOs or some combination of that, I mean, the ACO model has a lot of technical aspects that maybe we can redo, but in concept, the idea that what we're going to be concerned about is the health of our population, not just on the marginal aspect of, well, did the knee get fixed right, or, you know, the heart get fixed right. So that's what I'm talking about.
Okay, thank you. When we talk about more accountability for population health and other efforts toward payment reforms, things like bundled payment, I'm not sure if you get a sense of deja vu in the sense of people will say, well, haven't we gone down this road before? I know you know a little bit about something of the development of HMOs.
DRGs in particular.
Well, and DRGs. How are the current efforts different from what's been done in the past?
So let's take and I'm sure many of you, if not most of you, are familiar with the creation. I had the privilege of chairing PROPAC, which was asked to implement the DRG system in 1983. And the current bundled payments is an extension of the DRGs. At that time, we created a bundled payment, but it was only for the hospital side. So it immediately brought nurses into the system. But at a critical time, not a good thing, we left the physician services out. We left the post-acute services out. And as a result, we actually did some things that in looking back, you know, all good things have bad systems to it. For example, maybe we pushed length of stay too short. Maybe we pushed, you know, right, you should clap, not because you got all the bad side of that. You know, I recently was in the hospital. You know, I was just getting used to it. I wanted to stay. The food was good. I want to tell you, the nurses were nice. I don't want to compare them to my wife, but I was very happy there. And then I got thrown out. What they didn't dare tell me was that DRG wouldn't pay anymore. Because I know that was, so let's go back. The answer is...
And Stuart, I'm sorry, but you have only yourself to blame for that.
I said to them, you know, I said, well, what code am I under? Anyway, so this is an extension of that. And I think it's very important. For example, by linking post-acute, it might pay, and it will pay, to keep a patient for another day or two, and then they don't need to go to, they can get the services done in the hospital. Some will need to go to a rehab or a SNF or stuff like that, but you know, for a lot of people with hips and knees, they can go right home. So A. B, when it comes to how physicians practice, they need to get into the game. So this idea of expanding the bundle to include physician payments and post-acute, I think is a win-win. It's more complicated. It can't be done willy-nilly. It can't be done for many services. We don't do a great job on really doing complicated mechanisms of measuring complicated patients. You know, when you take the DRG, we started with 367 categories. Now we have almost 1,000 because we realized, the system realized we need to do a better job. So we're going to have to learn. But I'm a believer in the bundled payment as it's a different mechanism than the ACO, but it's another way of trying to provide high quality care for less, and then to take those resources and redirect some of them to this broader area of social determinants.
So one thing I think I hear you saying with this approach of bundled payments or a lot of the efforts that are going on is aligning some of the incentives that may have been in conflict. So while it was in the hospital's interest to discharge somebody sooner, but then what's in the interest of the home health agency or the skilled nursing facility. But now if you're able to look at an episode of care, then as you said, it might make sense to keep somebody in the hospital a day longer because that's going to save costs in terms of what's needed in terms of services that follow. Am I hearing that correctly?
That's exactly right. And I think from the nurse's point of view, the idea that you're on such a treadmill and you know you're being asked to push patients out that really should stay another day or two. And I think bundled payments, if we have a way actually of improving the ability that you decide, you know, with your medical team when that patient should leave, rather than having an economic incentive that almost forces you to do it. We did what we thought was right back in the 80s, but you know, it may have been right. And length of stay was too long, but you know, maybe we pushed it. Well, I know in a number of cases we pushed it too hard.
With an election coming up, we know there'll be a new administration. We don't know yet what Congress will look like. I'm not going to ask you to use a crystal ball on this, but depending on the changes that take place in this town, should we expect a lot of changes or a lot of difference in what's going on now in terms of federal policy? Or should we expect more of the same in terms of issues of new approaches to payment, et cetera?
Well, you know, listen, no one who knows anything about our health system can be very happy with this town. I must admit, I've spent my life in Washington. I much more enjoy being in Massachusetts these days, but that's another story. It's not another story. So here's my take on, listen, I will admit, I'm a big fan of the Affordable Care Act. But there are a number of changes that need to be made. You know, I mean, everybody that has anything to do with writing it. Now, I go all the way back. Yes, I go back to the Nixon administration. And ironically, for some of you, ironically even for me, if you look at the Affordable Care Act, 80% of the Affordable Care Act was in the Nixon plan in 1973. And again, it was in the Romney plan, which is the basis for health reform in Massachusetts. And by the way, we have the lowest uninsured rate in the country. And so this was a bipartisan piece of legislation that got just caught up in all kind of stuff. That's the nicest way term. I can. So where am I coming about? If, and it's a big if, but we surely need it. We need a Congress and a president that can come together to reform the Affordable Care Act to do what it was supposed to do. And, you know, whether it's at the exchange level or at the patient level. Now, you know, do I think it's going to happen? Why not? Why not? The answer is definitely. It's going to happen. And I have a bridge I can sell you, too.
Okay, well, thank you. Along with the crystal ball.
That's right.
So, got it. So one of the questions from the audience. We all agree that nurses need to be leading transformation, but are upstaged by physicians and others. What do you advise nurses to do to be acknowledged and tapped for lead roles?
So, yeah, listen, we all live in, unfortunately, sometimes the real world isn't so nice. So during the commission days for the IOM study, we heard testimony after testimony. And what came through is this needs to be a team effort. You can't lead it, but then the physician shouldn't lead it either. It needs to be a team effort, and the better institutions are beginning to get it. It's not happening fast enough. It's not happening in all parts of the country. This is a team effort, and it's not a question of the leader there and the rest of the people. It really should be a team. And we heard a lot of testimony from groups around the country where it's getting that way. Not fast enough, not extending enough. So my statement, you know, I mean, and it's a tough job, is to push as hard as you can to become part of that senior team. And, you know, we had a number of more enlightened physicians who came before us, including several on our commission, that made the same statement. I am optimistic on this. I think over time, I see it over time, this issue of team-based care and team-based leadership is going to become more important. You know, I don't have a magic bullet here. I know that there's a lot of groups that, you know, just are looking in the rearview mirror all the time and, you know, like it the way it was. But you know what? They can't survive. I think this pressure for doing more with less will force leadership changes, and the ones that don't change are going to find themselves in really serious shape.
And I think also, if we could just say that often organizations that believe they're representing the interest of their members are often either, well, sometimes run the risk of being ahead, but often of being behind where their members are. So certainly with physician organizations, what their representatives may be saying and doing and what's happening on the ground more and more may be different.
Let me suggest one complicated but important issue. The government, the federal government, and some states' government are going through pretty dramatic changes in the way they pay, either through the DRG, through what MACRA for physician payments, and it's been mostly a physician game. Nurses need to, first of all, better understand the complexity. We at Brandeis have been working, with the federal government, and we've been working with a number of physician groups on better understanding what does it take to provide the care for different patients. Nurses need to be as much involved. They need to learn and ultimately to be part of those teams. Ultimately, we're going to go to MACRA 2 and MACRA 3 and begin to think not only about how we pay physicians, but how we pay healthcare professionals. So right now, I would suggest that some of you, particularly those in the research and the technical, learn more about these complex areas of patient care, whether it's at the ambulatory side or at the hospital side. Because ultimately, we need to change the payment system towards clinical appropriateness. And the clinical appropriateness should not only be the physician side. But it's complicated and it's technical. So it's going to require a fair amount of knowledge.
So to the extent that nurses aren't involved in a lot of those discussions and planning that should happen, this might not be the fairest way to ask, but what's lacking, or where is the deficiency? Is it in the willingness of the people at those tables to bring nurses in? Is it our profession's lack of focus and education around those technical issues, or all of the above?
Well, obviously it's both, but it's primarily, it's the unwillingness of those on the top to give the power. Let's face it, I mean, and it's, as I said, they're looking in the rearview mirror, they're thinking, and even, you know, physicians who I would have thought on other grounds would be a little more understanding. It sort of takes me back when I hear some of that language. So I'm not here blaming you at all. So we need to change that, and at some point, government needs to be part of this, and basically saying, you know, you're going to provide education to us as government. This should not be just the physician group coming and educating us. It needs to be a healthcare team, which includes senior nurses. So Government can be helpful in doing this. Physicians, hopefully over time, will learn. But 3, you need to become better educated on these complicated things so that when the time comes, they don't look at you, well, you don't understand. You're going to say, we do understand, and we can be helpful. So, you know, I don't want to minimize. It's an uphill fight, but you know what? It's a fight worth taking on.
Okay, great, thanks. A lot of questions that I know we won't get to all of them, but let me ask you one more at least. In your opinion, what are the primary social investments that should be prioritized?
Well, that's a very good question because, again, we can't, just saying, well, we need to spend more on social determinants. I mean, we're talking about hundreds of billions of dollars. These are big issues: better housing, better education, better nutrition. So we have to figure out. That's why that question's a good one. And as I said, Lauren Taylor, who is, wise beyond her age. She's a graduate student getting her PhD at Harvard, and she actually provided sort of a list in area case management, for example, some housing, strategic investments in housing for people, education. Then you're not going to be able to redefine the education system. You could do that as members of your community. So I would say from the health point of view, case management, getting into the homes after the patient leaves the hospital, for example, being part of that team. And 2, where you think it is appropriate, whether it's, as I said, some housing, some structural changes. I mean, we hear these stories all the time about, buying an air conditioning for an older person who lives on the top floor so that in the summer they can breathe better. You don't want to make air conditioning available for everyone who's a patient, but so it's strategic investments beyond the narrow definition of health care that will improve health and ultimately improve the bottom line for your institutions. And the whole issue about readmissions becomes critically important here because, as you know, the government is now penalizing many of your institutions for the fact that readmissions. And the typical thing in the hospital is, why are you blaming me? I fixed the heart, I fixed the knee. Well, I'm sorry. And I'm going to get to something you didn't ask, but one of the debates we had is, well, why let the health system invest the social? Just let's bring another group in. The truth of the matter is you have to be in for 2 reasons. 1, you understand your patients, and 2, that's where the money is. So I say the healthcare community needs to be a critical component of reallocating those dollars towards the social area. And again, I would push case management and some housing stuff, but I'm sure there are others that you know better than I do.
Okay, thanks. One other question from the audience. What are the primary factors contributing to ACA demise, that's that individual's characterization, not necessarily mine, and private insurance rates increasing?
So this is, I'm sorry, this is technical, but maybe I can simplify it. The biggest problem within the ACA are the exchanges. And just think of what happened. We took a segment of our society that was terribly underinvested in good health care. And we said, you are now eligible. Now, and then we created 2 different groups, one which we subsidized, and one which had, by basis of income, was above the subsidy line. And then we said, and oh, by the way, this small group of people has to pick up all the extra costs of these sick people who are now getting health care, rather than spreading it along the whole population. So guess what happened? The cost of providing that insurance shot up. The insurance companies didn't anticipate it. Many of them lost hundreds of thousands and millions of dollars. Half of them went out of the business, and the ones that are staying in are asking for very big increases. The truth of the matter is we need to share those costs into a much broader component. And I'm not talking about a public option. I have some positives. That's a longer discussion, but I do think we need to figure out a way to share those higher costs of the sickest people that are now being provided decent health care among a bigger group than just the people that are getting the insurance. That's the weakest link of the Affordable Care Act.
Okay. Is there an integrated structure or model that can provide a foundation to address the contributors to poor health, education, housing, et cetera? You addressed this to some extent in terms of what the priorities should be, but is there a model
The
to address
answer
that?
is, we need to know a lot more. You know, the people who have been doing research on this have been like away from us. They've been doing their own thing and doing some good stuff. But we, collectively, we need to better educate ourselves on what additional investments can bring about improved health and ultimately lower costs. And the answer is there's no one model out there. The ACO is just the first attempt to provide financial incentives so that the healthcare community can see some of the benefits back, which I believe we need to have. So the answer is no. There is no one model.
How do you propose to negate special interest groups in regards to payment restructuring?
I've been at this 50 years. What special interests? You know, this is, you know, you just got to keep at it, and you need to provide the right set of incentives. But let's face it, what I said before, we did provide the right set of incentives under the DRGs, but we, you know, over time, it became somewhat the wrong set of incentives. That's not surprising. We need to continue to change. Special interests will always be part of the system. We're all special interests in a different sort of a way. You know, it depends on what the interests are.
And how special
So,
they are.
you know, I got my own special interests. So, they're part of our system. You know, we need to beat them when it's time to beat them. But the best way to do it is to co-opt them and get them to work for the better good. That's why you do need win-wins sometime. But you know, I mean, that isn't going to go away.
Okay. I know who wrote this. Where specifically will nurses shine from an economic perspective in healthcare reform?
So it depends on your role. So to the extent that you're still involved critically in patient care, whether it's at the bedside or in the management of your institutions, getting our delivery system to become more efficient. But again, remember what I said, it ought to be in a way that those efficiencies are shared, maybe 3 ways. Some of it should come back to your institution or organization. Some of it ought to be reinvested in social determinants, and some of it needs to potentially come back to the patients. Because after all, now it's your patients that are being asked to pick up a larger and larger component, whether it's through deductibles, co-payments, narrow networks. So, so for those of you who are involved in patient care, you know, that's good. For those of you who are moving into more leadership positions, either at your system level, where you can play a bigger role in restructuring, that's where it is. And obviously, the third part is as citizens. This needs to be fought at every level. And each of us needs to do from our own perspective. So, you know, it depends on where you sit and what role you're playing in the system.
One additional question. State governments are so adverse to new spending on social programs. As an economist, what promise do you think social impact bonds offer in this area?
Interesting idea. I hadn't heard.
We caught you by surprise?
Well, no, it's actually a very good idea. And, you know, the idea that, well, so remember what a bond is. You know, you're going to borrow the money, but you got to pay it back. And so, again, yeah, it has some interesting, but we have to develop the mechanism to pay that bond back. And the people that lend you the money have to see that, or they're not going to lend you the money. You know, I understand how the bond market works. And so in concept, that's an interesting idea. But again, it needs to be as an investment so that we can see the benefits, and then part of those benefits have to come back to the bondholders. But getting back to my basic thing, this needs to be viewed as an investment with a return. And yes, part of it needs to be improving health, but also part of it needs to be in improving the efficiency of the system so that we can pay it back and do it again. You see what I'm saying? That if there's no return in I hate to say this, I'm an economist. If there's no financial return, then you can't use the money to reinvest it. You can't use the money to pay off the bondholders, and then then it just becomes an expenditure. Now, it could improve health, which is fine, but you need to do more, and I think we can.
Okay. One question. Although we've framed the title of this keynote around entitlement reform, it's not, obviously that's an issue that may or may not be addressed, but a related issue is whether spending on entitlement programs crowds out spending on other programs, health, social programs, et cetera. Should nursing be listening to those that are advocating for major changes in entitlement programs as a way to free up more money for other programs?
So here's my take, and I might not get uniform support for this. I think the reason why I believe in a balanced system between public and private, I have no problems with an all-public system. I'm in, you know, Medicare, well taken care of. I'm a strong advocate for Medicare. In principle, I'm not opposed to a public system, but what does bother me is that issue, that we need government at the state level and at the federal level to do a lot of other things. And if healthcare is all through the public system, I'm sorry, it will crowd out other needed investments. So we should use the public system when we need it, and only it can do it. But where we can use the private system, we should do that too, with government oversight, government to get rid of some of those special interests we talked about, to modify them. And more importantly, to invest in people that they don't have the wherewithal to do it privately. So yeah, if we're not careful, expenditures on healthcare does crowd out other areas. But if we do it right, it's the right. So finding that balance, and every state is going through that issue, as is the federal government. So yeah, so we need to be careful. I mean, but that doesn't mean we shouldn't be spending the money. We just need to know what we're doing.
Okay, got it. You'll like this question. How can we cost out nursing care such that nurses are seen as value versus nurses not seen as an invisible workforce?
Yeah, that is a great question, and it does require a different cost accounting model than we currently use in healthcare. Just like we need to figure out for people that stay home and take care of whether it's ill patients or children, get a better system. I think that our system doesn't reward a lot of very, very critical services. And it has to do with that we rely too much on the market to generate so-called value. So maybe we ought to work together in developing a balance sheet that takes account of the services that are provided by nurses and others within the context of the hospital. It is a good question, and we just haven't done it.
One other question from the audience. How can we drive healthcare improvement for Native people and people of color?
Wow, that's a big issue. I mean, you know, we are, we are making improvements. And you know what? Of all of the services we provide, the healthcare community does a better job. Not a perfect job, not a job, we need to do better. So while we need to do better for those segments of our society that have been discriminated against and underfunded and so on, we also should, not me, you should take some pride in a lot of the services that you do provide. When you compare the value that healthcare provides compared to the education system, the housing system, the employment system. So, in no way am I not saying we shouldn't do a better job. As a matter of fact, we need to build on what we're doing. Because many of you, if not most of you, do take your patients, and I see that all over the place. So I teach a policy class, as you know, David, and I make sure we focus on aspects of the health system that discriminate, aspects of the health system that doesn't provide the needed services. So in no way am I not saying we should do more, you know that. But we should also recognize a lot of the good things that the health system does.
Okay. One other question from the audience. How do we get the message to the public that more is not always needed and that they need to assume more responsibility for their health?
You know, that is a good, and you know, for a long time I was very much opposed to that. You know, it was like blaming the victim kind of stuff. So we need to do it, we need to do more, but we need to do it in a very balanced way. Because there are some people, I'm sorry to say, that use that responsibility as an excuse for doing anything. I mean, I've been giving speeches and talks for more years than I can count, and often what I hear, you know, as I said, I think government needs to play a bigger role, and often the responsibility of the patient is often used as an excuse, and of course I have no tolerance. But with that said, I do think we all need to learn, we need to take more responsibility for our lifestyle and so on. We are trying to do education. I am far from the expert on that. You know, it's not easy, but we need to be at it.
And just a follow-up, I mean, as you discussed it, certainly when you talked before and you said, you know, with issue about non-payment for early readmissions and, you know, the response of, hey, we fixed the heart, we did our part, patient came back. I know many providers feel like, well, why are we getting blamed or why are institutions facing a penalty when the patient went out and didn't do anything that we advised? So I guess, I mean, is that the other side of the coin that, yeah, we want to encourage people to take responsibility for their health, but if they don't, then where does the accountability fall?
That's exactly what I'm saying.
Yeah.
I understand that, but but I'm sorry. We in the healthcare are often the leaders in our community. Whether you work for a hospital, you're often the largest employer. We are the cornerstone of so many of our communities, and yes, as a result, we have to take on responsibilities that really, when you push it, you can make it's not my fault. I get that part. But there are things that we can do. And yes, these people, there are all kinds of examples of responsibilities that patients should take on, they don't take on. I don't doubt that for a minute. That is a very hard issue to take on. But don't use that as an excuse for things that we can do. We can't and shouldn't be held responsible for the whole thing, but let's start out by saying, let's think about what we, hospitals, doctors, nurses, social workers, can do to help. And what can we do to educate the patients to do a better job.
So taking, oh, I'm sorry.
Yeah, go ahead.
No, so taking some accountability.
You have to
for,
take some
for
accountability.
what can be done, recognizing that may not take universally, but that it can.
Exactly.
It can make progress toward that goal of shared responsibility, if you will.
That's it.
So, okay.
It's the role you play as leaders in your community.
I see our president lurking to the side, or shall we wrap up here? So, Stuart, any closing comments?
No,
that,
thank you
that you'd
for
like to
inviting
make?
me. You know, I have such respect for the things you do, and it's a pleasure to see you again, David, and all my former students who are just doing wonderful things. And more of you should come to the Heller School. Thank you.
Absolutely. So, thank you so much. So, thanks.
Thank you very much. I love this. I love the mixture of an intellectual exchange and also the humor, something that has been missing, I think, in a great deal of the debate and policy conversations we've had lately. So thank you both for that. So I also want to thank our planning committee, who has made the panels that we've heard over the last several days something very special. And I want to thank you all for the hard work. I also want to thank those of you that have attended all of our policy and panel sessions. And I'm hoping that you're, as I am thinking, some of what we've heard affirms, I think, what the Academy is doing. But I think a lot of it will help us move forward as well. So I also want to thank our incredible staff, as always. Yeah, thank you. Now, as always, we want your feedback, and we have some very good mechanisms. You'll be getting an email from us to ask you for your feedback about the conference. But here are just a couple of things, if you could keep in your mind while you're waiting for that email, because we'd like to hear your feedback on this. First of all, did you learn something new at the conference? That, you know, you're all very smart and bright people, especially about these topics, but did you learn something new? Because that's what we aim to do. So think about that one. And are you contemplating a new action that you plan to take as a result of this conference and what you heard? So when you get that email, think about the questions to give us some feedback, but also think about those two questions. I'd really appreciate that. So we're not quite done. I want to just give you the lineup for the rest of the day. So if you purchased a box lunch, that'll be waiting for you in the Georgetown room. Our expert panel and committee meetings are taking place this afternoon as well, and that will begin at 1 p.m. Of course, we're very much looking forward to our induction ceremony tonight, and so at 4:30, these doors will be open to new fellows and family members, so you can come in and reserve your seats. New inductees know, I think, where they're going to be sitting. There's a marked space for you. And then at 4:45, there's a reception in the foyer right out here for all of our guests, and people will be welcome to enter the ballroom. At 5:30, the new fellows will be gathered for a photo, and then the induction ceremony begins promptly at 6 p.m. And then following the induction, we have our fabulous celebrations with food and drink and music and dancing. So we look forward to seeing you all there. And one more thing, I want to invite Sally Lusk. We have another drawing. So we'll end with a drawing.
Thank you. We hope you've seen and digested to some extent the position statement approved by the board on the harmful effects of environmental noise exposures. And we hope that that's something that you do learn and some new action you might take after you leave here, because you're part of our dissemination plan. We believe all nurses need to know that noise is very harmful, and we've been talking about finances here. And since we know that $3.9 billion could be saved each year by reducing the noise-related hypertension and heart disease. So that's a goal. And my colleagues up here now, Marjorie McCullough, who's also a co-author of the statement adopted by the Academy Board. And we have 3 pairs of earmuffs to draw for you to take home, to use whenever you're in noisy activities. Keep that noise away from all of your body's systems where it will cause harm. Good. She's demonstrating how to wear them.
I can hear you.
Good. See? And we wanted Bobby to draw. We have 2 regular pairs of earmuffs. So the first one, Eileen Kintner.
Oh, Eileen! Yay.
Are you here? You've got to be here because we're not shipping. We seen anything of Eileen, or she's coming? Oh, good.
All righty. Talk about some of the negative effects of noise.
We hope you saw our banner and the fact that it affects a lot of areas, all areas of the body, and responsible for low birth weight, all kinds of problems. So, Patricia Butterfield. That's the special ones.
These 2?
No, the one. That's that one we get. This is the next one. Okay. And you can say something, Marjorie. Okay. And this last one is for a very special pair of earmuffs, much more expensive, but all of these donated by 3M Company. We're very appreciative of their doing that. And these have a communication system in them as well. And this is Linda Grow. Thank you for your attention. Please go home and work to develop ordinances, laws, regulations, and enforcement of noise levels. And we do have for you to pick up and use earplugs, each one of you, for the noise levels at the soiree tonight. Thank you.